and welcome to the Newbery Report, where we take children's literature super seriously. Today on the podcast, MC Higgins the Great by Virginia Hamilton. Hello, and welcome to the Newbery Report. I'm Carrie Caston, your trustworthy and honorable host. And joining me today is Carolyn Burns. Carolyn Burns, how are you?
Hi, I'm good, Carrie. How are you?
Great, thank you very much. So, Carolyn, do you want to start with the back of your book?
Sure. Okay. So Mayo Cornelius, aka MC Higgins, sits on his gleaming 40-foot steel pole towering over his home on Sarah's Mountain. Stretched before him are rolling hills and shady valleys, but behind him lie the wounds of strip mining, including a mountain of rubble that may one day fall and bury his home. MC dreams of escape for him and his family, and one day atop his pole, he thinks he sees it. Two strangers are making their way towards Sarah's Mountain. One has the ability to make MC's mother famous, and the other has a freedom that MC has never even considered.
I appreciate the dramatics because the back of the book is written fairly dramatically. I like that ours, though different editions, are the same with the exception of mine doesn't say AKA MC on it.
Oh, mine doesn't either. I just added that for our own benefit.
That's great. So they stuck with this back of the book description despite how confusing it might be.
Yeah, so let's talk about these two strangers that make their way towards Sarah's Mountain. So one of them is, I think, the basis of most of what happens in the book, and that's our lovely character of
Loretta Outlaw.
Oh, no. I was stranger number one-ing James K. Lewis.
Oh, yes.
AKA the dude.
Yeah, the dude. Yeah, I was like, are we in, what's the name of that Coen Brother movie?
Bowling.
Yeah. Jesus.
Jesus. Big Lebowski.
Yeah, I was like, are we suddenly in the Big Lebowski? Like, why are we referring to this guy as the dude and a dude, as if dude were, I guess at the time, like that something that meant really specific, which I assume had to do with long hair and music, ethnomusicology, because that is unfortunately painfully clear to a seasoned reader of this book that guy is just there to record the dying art of yodeling amongst this very insular community.
Right. So plot-wise, MC has heard from the grapevine or from his friends that there's this guy that's going to come up top the mountain and capture his mother's voice on a record, and then will invite her down
on a tape recorder. I would love him to have a traveling record player.
To have a traveling record press. So he records her on the tape recorder, and then he's going to take her voice down, sell it to these bigwig music producers, and make her famous, and that will be their escape from Sarah's Mountain. And you know, I think that as intelligent readers, you can kind of tell just from context clues that that's not going to happen.
Yeah, the more characters talk about something happening, the more you're like, oh no.
Also, just
this isn't gonna happen.
Just with common sense, someone's not traveling to the middle of the woods or the mountain to find, the one voice so that they can take them down to Nashville and record a hit album. It's just not something that's going to happen.
And it's particularly sad because as I was mentioning, it was painfully clear to me as soon as this character showed up that his job is to record this like slowly dissolving community of people that communicate via yodeling in the mountains. And well, I guess we'll get into this in a moment. We might as well get into it now because here we are. The sort of stench of death and extinction like reeks very heavily in this piece in a way that is foreshadowed beyond the length of the book. The book only takes place over 3 days. Mm-hmm. But you can clearly tell that the life that these characters know and came here to live is slowly dying out. And you can tell that through a variety of things, through the way that the natural resources of the land have been eaten up and they've been left in the wake to just wait for it to slowly come down the hill and crumple their house.
Right.
This it's so funny how things from now the 70s read like they're from this almost prehistoric, pre-internet time where like they don't have a phone in their house, even though it's clearly contemporary because he sings Ticket to Ride and his parents met post World War II. So yeah, this book takes place if not in the early 70s, in the mid to late 60s, in which case the fact that they don't have a phone is going to become pretty quickly an anomaly to this area. And they've already felt the weight of like the rest of the world coming in when they were sort of shoddily paid off for the damage done to their home. But pretty soon, the rest of the world is going to kind of come crashing in on these people. And we feel it with the outsiders sort of being this foreboding presence of what's going to be the end of the life that they have as they know it. Now that we've gotten off this dark tangent, let's talk about how we feel.
Okay.
How did you feel about the book? Did you like it, or?
You know, I had contrasting feelings about this book. I really, really enjoyed certain aspects of it, but at the end of the day, like, I wasn't excited to keep reading it. And I kind of had to not like force myself to finish it, but had to like take the effort to want to read it. And I think that kind of stems from the fact that nothing really happens in this book plot wise. There's not a lot that goes on, and there's actually a lot of repetition when it comes to not only like events, but like ideas, dialogue. You know, there's a lot that just happens over and over and over until I started thinking, is this like a literary device? I'm like, am I supposed to read into the fact that it keeps repeating itself? Am I supposed to think that, you know, because this kid thinks the same thing every 10 minutes for the entire book, that I should put more weight on that? But I don't think so. I think it's just, it didn't flow in the way that it really was able to keep my interest.
That's interesting. I found the book more compelling as I went along. So I have the exact opposite opinion. I had trouble getting into it because I was kind of like, oh boy, we're putting all our eggs into these baskets, which are going to end horribly. He treats, our main character, MC Higgins, treats the new woman in town, the new girl in town, Loretta, horribly. Like he stabs her. That's the second time. The first time he just awkwardly jumps like at her.
Right. And then the second time he stabs her.
I think he scratches her, but yes.
I'm pretty sure the word that was used was stabs her.
So there was a lot turning me off really early on. When we finally meet Lewis, he talks about her as if she's a little girl, despite the fact that he was a hitchhiker that she picked up and drove to this town. And there was so much turning me off. I sort of get a little hesitatent with male lead protagonists, which I know is both redundant and unimaginative of me to find as a turnoff. But the way that he plays with his father and the insane, the violent games that they partake in, which he then carries over into his relationship with this new girl, is like utterly... It just completely turns me off to wanting this guy to do well.
I think, though, this is tangential. Is that okay?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
If we didn't have tangents, we wouldn't have a show.
Just because you mentioned the fighting with his father. So the very first time we're actually introduced to the character of the father, they have this like wrestling session where, you know, the dad kind of is treating him in the very stereotypical fashion of like, man up, like if you're a true man, you should be able to fight me, you should be able to wrestle, you should be able to, you know, take pain and do all that stuff. And at one point, basically, MC screams like mercy or whatever, and the father lets up, and you see that he's like a true dude. But the first impression that at least I got was that the father was one of those like overbearing, aggressive, probably emotionally distant fathers. And I was like, oh, what an interesting idea to have a child growing up in that sort of an environment. And where is that going to bleed over into the rest of his life? And then every other experience you had with the father past that was loving and nurturing and understanding. You know, like we see glimpses into the father's racism, which comes out later. But at the same time, like, he's accommodating to him and his friends. He's even though we know he has racist feelings towards this other family, the Kilburns, which are the witchy folk. When he eventually brings one of them over, he supports it. You know, he doesn't say anything. He allows this child to come into his home. I don't know. It seemed like a weird 180 flip to me.
Yeah. First off, that's the end of the book. So we had 270 odd pages of the father evolving to get to the point where, and it was basically almost at knife point from MC that the father allows Ben, the son of the Kilburns, who MC has been hanging out with.
I'll give you that.
At knife point, which he didn't steal, but assumes the girl left for him. And Loretta left for him. I agree. I think that we don't get the kids' ages until very late. We get that MC is 13 when the father sort of makes fun of him for being 13 and having a crush. So he's been following this girl, Loretta, who's walking around the woods on her own, who has a note from her mom, so everyone knows it's okay. He's been following her around. The first time he practically jumps on her, like not jumps her, but jumps on her. And the second time, he pins her down, kisses her, takes her knife and marks her with it.
Stabs her.
I think it was a little lighter. I'm not justifying. It's wrong. It's wrong. And then he's like, why doesn't she like me? Oh, honey, like, I know you're 13, but you can't think that I guess that's how he thinks how women work.
But in a way, isn't it interesting to just have a cultural study of a child that is so distanced from every other person that really the only people he comes in contact with are his immediate family and then his one friend that he's been forbidden to hang out with and has to do it in secrecy, and then plop an age-appropriate girl down in front of him?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying...
But he does go to school. It's not like he's never met them before.
That is true.
But maybe there's something that turns him off, something that feels too close to home about the schoolgirls, that he doesn't know how to interact with them. And I'll give you, a transition occurs somewhere between 12 and 16 for boys. So it's possible that it's just coming on. Although we don't get sort of puberty signifiers in this. There's dreams, but there's no wet dreams. There's anger, but there's no sudden, inexplicable anger. Everything feels pretty grounded. So not that puberty isn't grounded. Puberty is an important and it's an experience you only have once. So maybe find a way to enjoy it. I think we should just say one word about Joan, not one word, several words, about Joan's affection and love and commitment to not only the land, but the way that he divides his love and respect and devotion to the land with that for his wife, Benina? Is that how we say it? Mm-hmm. Are you just saying that? Benina, okay. How he divides and respects both Benina and the land, because she says, I don't want all of these tombstones in my yard where my kids are going to play. So he removes all of the tombstones of his family, of his ancestors who came to this, not ancestors, I guess, great-grandmother and grandma, or his grandmother and father, because it's his great-grandmother, right? Yeah. Of his grandmother who escaped to this area with her baby from presumably her terrible Irish husband, I guess, to found this homestead, which they own, which is a source of pride, totally negated by the freeloading Kilburns who say you don't have to own anything, you can just farm it and squat. And he removes these tombstones, which for him are markers of honor, and hides them under the house so that she can have the yard that she wants for her kids.
Yeah, I don't know if I have any more of a comment other than just it's beautiful. He's a complex guy, that Jones. And I think apart from MC, he's the one that's written the most passionately by the author. She really gives him this full character to him. And he's in so little of the novel. And there's so much in their move back to the hills, which is clearly important to him because she had a job in an embassy. Mm-hmm. She had presumably a great job that paid a good amount of money, that she got the carpet, and they moved back for him. I mean, he says they wanted to go back to the hills, but you really get the sense that it was for him, and he doesn't even really have a job. She's the one that works primarily. See, MC, you can convince Loretta to live with you. Apparently men can convince women to give up everything and live on hills with them.
We have to take a quick pause. We'll be right back.
This episode of the Newbery Report is sponsored by Payfully. Renting your home or spare room can be a great way to earn some extra income, but actually getting paid can take months. That's where Payfully comes in. Payfully is a safe and secure way to get paid for your upcoming reservations within 24 hours of them being booked. Payfully deposits directly into your bank account with funds usually available the same day. It works with all the major platforms, Airbnb, VRBO, HomeAway, and others, and they've helped thousands of hosts expand their business or cover unexpected expenses. Visit payfully.co, that's payfully.co, for $20 off your first request with code Newbery. That's payfully.co, promo code Newbery, Newbery.
Hello, listeners! Are you a business owner? Your next customer might be listening right now, just like you are. You can let them know who you are by sponsoring this show. Just email us at hello@citizenracecar.com. That's HELLO@citizenracecar.com. And now back to MC Higgins the Great. So I guess we should finally talk about the Kilburns.
Oh,
as Carolyn has been waiting the whole episode to do so.
The Kilburns. So, Carrie, you and I were talking before this podcast. You seemed to think that they were an African-American family, and I seemed to think the exact opposite. And I thought that was interesting. I wonder why we both had those differing opinions.
I assumed because we didn't really talk about anybody's race that everybody was sort of the same. Because in such a small town, I think it would be more overt to if people were different races.
Just the description of the family. I think, too, the name Kilburn sort of put Irish in my head a little bit. So the distinguishing characteristic of the Kilburns, though, is that they are the six-fingered hands
and toes
people. The witchy folk. What a wonderful term, I have to say. I really responded to the fact that they were witchy. I don't know why. It's such a simple term to use, but what an interesting take on. It's basically like racism mixed with, what's the word? Like a cult? Like I'm not
witchy. Yeah. It's not a nice thing to call people, but I did love that scene where eventually Loretta is like, you think you're brave, like, let's go to the Kilburns, like, not plantation, but whatever, compound.
Commune, yeah.
They're a compound mound. Mound compound.
Commound.
Commound. Yes. Hashtag that. Yeah, they go to their compound, and like every time he gets upset or he feels angry, he describes whatever the most recent thing is with like witchy hands. So like we get these just flashes of his anger that sort of felt to me like a Danny Boyle movie, you know, where he sort of interjects those still images to sort of like frighten you. And it was just this like refrain of witchy hands.
To me, it was such a realistic portrayal of the truths of racism. And I think that the reason for that is that, you know, we get these wonderful moments in the novel where MC comes to terms with the fact that logically there's nothing wrong with these people. And he has these like wonderful little heart-to-hearts with himself where he discusses, you know, that they're not so different from us and we shouldn't be scared of them. And what's so wrong with their fingers anyway?
And they have food and we don't have all that much food.
And they are good people. You know, one of his best friends is Ben. And you sort of start to see him like coming to terms with like the logical fact that I think we all know that disliking someone just based on their race is silly and unnecessary. But then whenever he goes into like these fits of fear or aggression or scared or whatever, that's when it comes out. And I think that that's so true to life, where it's not something that your logical brain is. It's something that's just been ingrained in him for so long that like his default is that the witchy people are bad and that they're witchy. And it was such an interesting take on it because I think it was so well portrayed in that regard. And it's not a common thing that you see written like so realistically like that.
I'm on the fence, though, about the way that it happened. I don't want to be anti-Loretta because she's, you know, an interesting woman on her own, like driving her little car across the country, which I think there's a lot more to her that we do not know about. But the way that she goes about exposing his biases is like kind of cruel. And in action, she has only seen Jones be nasty, because when the Iceman cometh, he's a pretty reasonable guy to them, you know. He says he actually enjoys when they come, because it's usually just him. And he tells their joke about charging $175, JK just 75, and he defends his father, but he doesn't take action. And so I think, I don't know, I'm of two minds, in the same way that MC is of two minds about whether she went about it in the most respectful way possible, because he gets there and they make fun of him the whole time, and she does nothing to support him when they're there. They keep making fun of him for eating meat. Which I was like, this is why no one likes vegetarians. Like, there's
But this is why I'm so interested in the Kilburns. What a fascinating group of people that we just get to see this like tiny little tip of the iceberg of what a fascinating, cool people they are. And I remember like after we left the compound and we returned back to just like the regular MC Higgins story, I was like, I want a whole separate book that's just on the Kilburns.
Oh, I could not stand them.
But on just this weird people that are like, they're vegetarian hill folk. They steal his rabbit's feet. We don't know. We don't know that it's them, but someone stole his rabbit's feet.
What a weird moment.
What a super creepy moment. that sent shivers up my spine when that happened. I was like, is someone behind him right now? He also, the dad, or who was it on the mound? It was probably the dad or one of the Kilburns.
Mr. Kilburn.
Has trapped all of the garden snakes to punish them for a crime that we never figure out what it is.
But he sleeps with them.
Yes, and he takes them out and lets them sit on his hand and I think bite his fingers and then go back in his jar of snakes he's just keeping hanging out. And there's this creepy old lady that just sits in the dark all day long and like
cabbage. Takes apart heads of cabbage. And he left and MC leaves and I was like, no, what an interesting people. Did you not want to learn more about them? Were you not intrigued, I
Carrie?
just didn't find them sympathetic. That doesn't mean we should.
Not at all, but I want to learn about them.
Like, I liked Ben. I was like, Ben, what a great guy. And poor Ben being like, not that there's anything wrong with the way that he lives, but he understands that he's shunned by the rest of society, but he doesn't really understand why.
Which is funny because Ben in and of itself lives in this commune of what seems like tens of, easily
23 kids, I think.
23 children.
Yeah.
Needless to say how many adults would be in there. And he lives next door to MC Higgins, a family of 5.
Yeah.
And yet he is the outsider. I feel like there's more of a story there.
Yeah,
and I'm so intrigued to hear what it's about. Also, there's got to be, I have to mention, like, they're one of the most beautifully, like, scenic and, like, wonderful imagery moments of the book is describing this strange, like, vine-built spider web that I remember as I was reading it being really upset that I was reading it and not watching a film of it because it seemed like something I just couldn't wrap my brain around exactly how it worked.
He says it's like a God's eye.
Yeah. But then like everyone hangs out on this weird like spider web of vines and then they just drop down to the fields below them to farm and then they pop back up to...
So you don't walk through the gardens to get where you're going.
Is that not weird?
It's so weird.
Don't you want to learn more about these people?
Ugh, so weird. I'm sorry, I just have to read this. This is Mr. Kilburn talking about green garden snakes. Oh, well, now this one, Kilburn said. I call him March Noon because that was the time I first caught him. He gave me several nightmares. You see, the green grass is pure pleasure to people. Put him on your pillow when you're feeling sick and he will lick away the fever. He will bring you the prettiest dreams. I wrote in all caps A-H-H.
What?
I was thinking a lot about like, why a book? Like, why is this a book? And there, because there is so much description, and I don't think that book writers should be denied description. Of course not, right? Like, of course we should be able to visualize what it is you're talking about, but it seemed so crucial, the concept of like getting lost, the way that things look the same. It felt like so important for you to see it. I don't know, did you feel like, why is this a book? Like, this should be a movie or something more visual?
A little bit. I mean, I will say this about the novel, is that the prose of the whole thing is beautiful. As far as like the written word on the page, like I just think it's so descriptive and so evocative of this wonderful environment that she's created. She's created this little like microcosm of, and it's an entire world basically, because you never leave the hill, but you start to see that like everything you want is on the hill. And in that way, I loved the book, and I think that was really interesting, and I love that it was written down, because there is some imagery you get better in words than you can like on a screen. But I don't know, like at the end of the day also, like I want it to be backed up with some more action and some narrative happening, and that just was something that left me a little bit wanting for.
I agree, because there were these times, like I mentioned, where we're in the close third person for almost the entirety of the story, but there are occasional moments where we sort of dropped for just a line or just an idea into MC's head, and we had I. Mm-hmm. And to me, that seems like one of the easiest methods of engaging a reader through a book is to put it in first person, right? Great, we're in someone's head. How compelling already. But then there is this other section right at the end of chapter 10, right before, like literally the last page of chapter 10, where it's like this happiness montage of they're eating the potato soup. Loretta, the traveling girl, Loretta, has been won over, I guess, by MC, and has agreed to come over for lunch. And the father has agreed to, I'll be so nice to her, you won't even know who I am. And he has shilled out some money for nutmeg, and he is making potato soup. And he's like at a fancy restaurant where you sit and look at the chef while they're preparing the meal, like is entertaining, telling stories, being really charismatic. And it's interrupted by a horribly disrespectful display of patronage towards the Kilburns, and the Kilburns come by and sell the ice. So that sort of disrupted the really romantic energy of the afternoon for MC and Loretta. And they're eating it now. He's really hoping to salvage the moment, and things seem to be going fine because she is eating the potato soup. She's having a great time, he thinks, and he, like, his head just goes to this like weird happiness montage of like them sitting next to each other eating the soup, and then like him teaching her how to fish, and like him teaching her how to skin a rabbit, and like back to the soup, and then like them running down the hills, and then back to the soup. And it's like, yes, this is this juxtaposition of like what we're seeing and what's in your head. It feels like the culmination of like bookness
right
about this. And I wish there'd been more of that. I think it came out in a way that you sort of indicated already about it being repetitive, and that was sort of what's going on in his brain. But those moments for me really worked. I loved how he had conversations with people in his head too. As someone that used to do that a lot, I think I'm better at it. As someone that used to, and still does sometimes, narrate action in their head, I think it's a way of coping and dissociating, so I don't recommend it. But as someone that used to do that a lot more, and someone that used to have a lot more conversations with people in their head, I definitely appreciated those moments. Though, for him, I was on the fence about whether it demonstrated a complete lack of understanding for the person that he was talking to in his head, or an understanding of those people. With Ben, we're sort of led to believe that is how Ben would talk, and how Jones would talk, but the conversations with Loretta were like totally made up, right?
Well, yeah, he had much less of a frame of reference for his weird internal conversation with Loretta, though. I don't know. I kept trying to put myself into the mindset of a boy living basically isolated for most of the time on a hilltop with only a few people to talk to every day. And I can see how this sort of this rich internal world comes out. Because I remember thinking at some point, I was like, oh, is this some weird artistic child prodigy? Or is this just something that the author has written in to give us more context? And then I was like, no, he probably has a rich inner world because that's all that he has. It's a world without TV and radio and all of these. I mean, they have a radio,
but they don't use it.
He knows Ticket to Ride, and I don't know how, but
they have a great couch and a plush carpet, which you're not supposed to be on at noon.
It's okay to track mud in as long as you clean it up afterwards.
Seems like pretty reasonable.
Yeah.
So I have two sort of illusions. An illusion of life, our metaphor within the piece that describes how one could interpret the life that one is leading or should look at life. So maybe you can take one if you want one. Yeah. I'll read them both and you can pick. So the first one, and they weirdly are on opposite pages of each other, about halfway through the book. 130, I don't know if you have the same, 130 and 131.
Okay.
So the first one is, the same thing day after day is enemy to a growing boy. And the second one is similar but different. I guess these are sort of truisms or aphorisms more than they are illusions, but second one is, you live wide awake, she said, or you quit living.
I like the second one.
I think we all like the second one. But also because we're not growing boys.
It's true.
So we should grade this book.
Yeah.
And then say our goodbyes. So before we say goodbye, Carolyn, what do you give this book?
I want to give it 2 floppy rabbit ears in memory of the poor rabbit who passed during the writing of this novel. I wish you had your paws back. Yeah, 2 out of 5. I think that's fair for the way that I felt about this novel.
Great. I'm going to give this book a 30-foot pole because I thought 40 feet was overcompensating. So thank you so much, Carolyn Burns, for yet again joining me to discuss MC Higgins the Great.
Oh, you're welcome, Carrie. Anytime.
All right. Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Newbery Report. Join the conversation on Facebook or Twitter at Newbery Report. That's NEWBERY Report. The Newbery Report is produced and hosted by me, Carrie Caston, and my co-host is Carolyn Burns. It's co-produced and edited by David Hoffman. The Newbery Report is a production of Race Car Radio. www.racecarradio.com. You can listen to new episodes there, or on Apple Podcasts, Google, Stitcher, or any of your favorite podcasting apps. Join us next time for the 1976 winner, The Gray King, by Susan Cooper.
Racecar Radio is a division of Citizen Racecar. We tell stories.